Hello friends, welcome back to another episode of Reddit Nuclear Revenge. Guys, this episode is gonna be a long one. It's a really long story on how an evil stepmother takes control of a man who wronged her. Before we go on, I just want to make it clear that these stories are for entertainment purposes only. Do not use these stories as ideas to commit nuclear revenge on people. With that said, I hope you stay for this story and subscribe for future videos. This story's titled, Evil Stepmother Takes Revenge on My Entire Family. To be honest, I have no idea what subcategory to write this story, because it has a bit of everything: entitled parents, entitled people, nuclear revenge, and fair warning. This story stretches out over a period of more than a decade, so it's gonna be a long one. So first, some backstory. I came from your average nuclear family. I had a mom and dad who hated each other and seemed to spend their whole marriage talking about divorce. An older sister whom I did not get along with, but as time went on would not only become my best friend, but also kind of my hero. And me, the youngest, 14 years old when this all started, very relevant to the story. My dad, until losing his job a few months ago, worked overseas most of my life and was only home 5 months of the year. So our tale begins with my mother succumbing from her long battle with cancer. She had been hospitalized for quite some time, and I will admit those last few months I'd given up completely. I had hardly gone to see her. I just could not bring myself to see her rotting away in that hospital bed. My dad hadn't been much better than me, and the hero of this story had been my sister, the one who had never gotten along with my mother, who held her hand until the very end. None of this is vital to the story, but it was the point where my sister not only won my respect, but also became the one person whom I would grow to trust more than any other. My dad, not so much. In fact, his life had hardly changed at all, and my mom's ashes had hardly been released, and he was overseas again, leaving me and my sister behind. Also worth mentioning, my sister was no longer living at home, but was living with her fiancé. He later cheated on her, she broke the engagement, and he will therefore not feature in this story. So all the pieces are set in place. My mom's dead, my dad's overseas, and my sister is living elsewhere, leaving me, a 14-year-old kid living alone in what, until recently, was our family home. Soon after, I got a tenant to take one of the rooms, and that rent money paid for all my living expenses. Now, as I mentioned, my dad was out of the country only 7 months of the year, which meant he was home for 5 of them, or so you'd expect. The truth is, he wasn't. My dad was a skirt chaser, and even in those 5 months, I hardly ever saw him, as he'd be out, staying with whatever he was hooking up with at that time. I could write about 1,000 or more stories about the women he dated in that time, but as none of them have relevance to this story, I'm skipping forward 4 years, and the introduction to my evil stepmother. It's worth mentioning that when she and my dad started dating, he was actually already engaged to someone else, whom just kind of disappeared from the story as if she was never in his life to begin with. Evil stepmother was the wife of a deceased politician. I've never been able to figure out how much exactly he left her, but my estimate is somewhere between 15 and 20 million. Although, neither my sister nor I had any interest in money. Her financial status was something of a relief, as my dad was pretty well off himself, so at the very least, we knew that she wasn't another gold digger. So actually, when I first met her, she was lovely, polite, a good sense of humor, overall just a nice person to be around. And I was truly happy that my dad had finally found somebody who could make him happy. Skip forward another year, my sister was now engaged and a new guy was starting to plan her wedding. My sister, being the angel that she is, even with a multi-million-dollar father, never asked him to contribute a single penny to the wedding. What did she ask him? For him, an evil stepmother, to attend. He was her dad after all. Please note that even though I'm calling her evil stepmother, she wasn't officially our stepmother yet at this point. She had given the date to evil stepmother, who kind of brushed it off and said they would try to attend, but they couldn't make any promises because it might interfere with their holiday plans. My sister was understandably distraught and ultimately just called off the wedding and would end up taking their vows in front of a judge. So a few weeks after evil stepmother had broken my sister's heart, she and my dad were traveling to God knows where, and my sister and I were at the movies. We both get the same text from evil stepmother. It went something like this. It said, "Hello, I wanted you to be the first to know that father has asked me to become his wife, and I have accepted. Cut forward to the day that my sister's wedding would have taken place, and we both get an invite to evil stepmother's house. My dad had long since moved in with her. I had a bad feeling about this, but I thought to myself that no one can possibly be so unnecessarily cruel. But if people weren't, then I would not be writing this story. So you guessed it. Evil mother had stolen my sister's wedding date and had married our dad that morning. The invite we'd received was to their wedding reception. There's going to be a massive jump now, but before I do, I just want to emphasize some of the highlights of my dad and evil stepmother's first marriage. Yes, you read that right. These included a house rule that strictly forbid me or my sister ever mentioning our deceased mother, me making the grave sin of turning 21. Please note that at no point did I ask my father to cut their vacation short to celebrate with me, but he decided to come surprise me and come home a day earlier to do so. The next 5 years, and I'm not making this up, every single time evil stepmother saw me, she would berate me for how my birthday screwed up their vacation. To top it all off, she would constantly try and play me and my sister up against each other, always cornering one of us and telling us what a waste of space the other was. So skip forward about another year. I had now been the landlord of the family house for about 7 years. I was now renting out to several tenants and using that money to rent the house from my dad. The rest, I used to upkeep the place as well as I possibly could. Basically, even though his name was still on the deed, it was pretty much accepted that the house was now mine and would officially become mine when my dad passes. The place was beyond sentimental to me. And then, one afternoon, he shows up with a car full of things, declaring that he has left evil stepmother and was moving back in with me. Oh joy! Following this, it took less than a month for all my tenants to break their contracts and move out. Yes, he was really that difficult to live with. The month ended and he went back overseas, leaving me with an empty house, and somehow still expecting me to pay him for that month's rent. Sorry, Dad, you kinda screwed that up for yourself. He returned 6 weeks later and fell back into his old pattern, never coming home, hooking up with any woman that looked at him, and then, somehow, getting back together with the fiancé he had left for evil stepmother. His divorce from evil stepmother had already been finalized by this point. And then, almost as if I was 18 years old again, he once again left that same fiancé for evil stepmother. At some point, they got remarried. I honestly don't even remember when. So let's get to the main part of the story that I haven't even touched yet. A secret about my dad. I love him dearly, but he's a freaking bastard. I would learn the hard way as I would become the pawn in his numerous affairs. He went so far to send some of these women to stay in the family house with me, and then invited me over to have dinner with him and evil stepmother, forcing me to fake a smile while the woman he was cheating with was literally hiding at my house. This went on for years. Both I and my sister knew about it. Both of us had begged him to stop, and he just did not give two hecks. It's taking a lot out of me not to use curse words as I relive this period. Also, during this period, my sister had given birth to a beautiful baby girl, even though my dad and evil stepmother had already been having marital problems at this time. Again, he had showed up with her to the hospital and introduced her as grandma. In the years that followed, this gorgeous little one would actually bring my sister and evil stepmother quite close together, which makes this all the more tragic. Flash forward several more years, I'm now 30 and going through a very tough time in my life. I had lost my own fiancé, in part due to my family shunning both of us and ultimately forcing me to choose between them and her. My business had hit a streak of insanely bad luck and was hanging on by a thread. I had lost all my savings trying to save my beautiful dog from a rare blood disease. She died a month later anyway. I was closer to being suicidal than I've ever imagined possible. And to top that all off, my dad again left evil stepmother and once more moved back in with me. To make matters even worse, he wasn't doing so alone. He brought with him his Asian mistress, a lady that could not speak a word of English, and they were literally communicating with each other via Google Translate. The whole situation was pretty messed up. Just to keep the timeline straight, he had left her before going back to work overseas, and had warned me beforehand that he would be moving back in with me upon his return. At no point had he mentioned his Asian mistress. At this time, evil stepmother was on the verge of her own mental breakdown and was calling my sister day and night, trying to learn why my dad had left her. This went on for the entire time that my dad was overseas and continued when he came back. My sister was calling me in tears, saying that she could not keep this secret anymore. she had grown fond of evil stepmother and knew that the only way to release her was to tell her about the affairs. There had been 8 that we know of. I, on the other hand, had never grown to like evil stepmother, but even I had always been disgusted by her father's behavior and never saw any justification on what he'd been doing to her. Ultimately, I told my sister to just tell her. That would be the biggest mistake of my life. You see, learning of my dad's betrayal had given stepmother a new purpose in life. She wasn't only going to get revenge on my dad, she was going to get revenge on everyone that was involved. Her first mission was to find out who that woman was that was currently staying with him. To find out, she turned to me. Now, side note here, I'd been so angry at my dad for this whole situation that I hadn't even been back to my house since he'd moved back in. I had spent about 3 days, including Christmas, just driving around aimlessly. I had slept in my car for those nights. I was done being his accomplice. Therefore, when evil stepmother asked me who the woman was, I happily told her. There was just one problem with this. My dad had foreseen me turning on him and had given me the wrong information. Therefore, in the eyes of evil stepmother, I had purposely sent her on a wild goose chase. Following this, my dad had sent me a message that I was no longer his son. The woman had actually been a masseuse at a massage parlor that both my dad and evil stepmother had often frequented, less than a kilometer away from their home. To this day, I don't know how evil stepmother found this out, but she showed up at the massage parlor and started screaming and threatening to sue. She also started following my dad's mistress around. What happened next, she refuses to admit was her doing, but a few days later, someone sent nude photos of my dad's mistress to her boss, and she was subsequently fired. My dad, in the meantime, had grown bored with her as well, and had started to rebuild his marriage with evil stepmother. This was unbeknownst to both me and my sister, and even made less sense when their second divorce finalized. My dad's mistress, around this time, also completely vanished off the face of the earth. I need to mention that evil stepmother often liked to brag about the mob connection she had from her deceased husband's time in politics, and openly told us how they can make people just completely disappear. Cut forward a few months later, I hadn't seen my dad in months and still had no idea that he and evil stepmother had gotten back together. I found this out when his Facebook relationship status changed to married to evil stepmother, followed by their wedding pictures. This was kind of a shock to me, but the biggest one was still to come. I was still in financial difficulty, following my recent streak of bad luck, and then I got a text. I forget what the exact wording was, but it basically came down to the fact that evil stepmother no longer felt comfortable living in their old place, knowing that he had met his mistress so close to there. So he was taking back the family home, and I was gonna have to evict all my tenants, and was also kicking me out. At that point, I'd been living in that house for 19 years, and had been acting landlord for 16 of those. To add fuel to the fire, I also learned that evil stepmother was having the old house demolished, and building a new place on top of it. I was shattered. That place had meant more to me than anything else in the world, and she was coming in with bulldozers to destroy it. To make up for my sudden eviction, they had, however, taken the liberty of already finding me a new place to live that they knew would be in my budget. So, Dad of the Year and evil stepmother had left me to pack up the entire house, including everything left from my mother. The shoebox that I was moving to obviously didn't have the space for any of those things, so most of it ended up on the sidewalk. To evil stepmother, this had been like a mini orgasm, as she had always had an unnatural hate towards my deceased mother, whom she had never met. She would go as far as to destroy every single thing that held any memory of my mother, even cutting down our family tree, quite literally, and turning it into firewood. She also took my mother's wedding ring that had been left to my sister to hold for safekeeping, only to quite literally throw it away and denying ever having it. That was her revenge on me. My sister, however, had other plans for her. You see, once my sister had exposed my father's affair to her, she had wasted no time in revealing to him that my sister had actually sold him out. My dad, being the self-entitled person he is, was still unable to see that he'd been in the wrong, and basically not spoken to my sister since. He had not only stopped speaking to her, but had also stopped talking to his granddaughter. Both him and evil stepmother had been quite active in her life for the first few years, and now had both written her off completely. As I write this, 2 years after my sister had exposed my dad, he has not spoken to or even asked about his granddaughter once. It also later turned out that evil stepmother was monitoring his phone, and I'm pretty sure she'd been deleting any messages that my sister had tried sending him. About this all being hard on him, he was right. Even though my dad may have brought all of this upon himself, I do truly feel sorry for him. Evil stepmother had taken away from all of us what she deemed most important to us. With me, it was my house and all of my memories. With my sister, it was her relationship with her father, and with my father, it was his freedom. She had taken away all forms of privacy and freedom that he had left. She had taken control of his bank accounts, taken to monitoring his incoming messages, deleted all of his friends from his Facebook account, and lost him his job. The new house they'd built even had an open bathroom that you could literally not pee in private. It was disturbing and honestly very hard to witness. This story doesn't really have an ending. The few times I've seen him, he's been under strict supervision from evil stepmother that usually ends with her fighting me and telling me what a stain I am on his life. Although I never saw my dad as any kind of saint, he was always my dad and I always loved him. Still do. But the man he is now is no longer a man, he's a prisoner. And I, for the life he's now living, I feel nothing but sadness. Update. For those saying that it's fake and that it's illegal for a 14-year-old to be renting out rooms, yes, you'd be right. Funny thing is about the law, people actually have to know a crime is being committed for it to become a legal issue. The tenants were getting pretty sweet deals, and it would have been against their own self-interest to report this situation. To the ones who said I was smooching off my dad, nope. I never took a cent from him after I turned 18. In fact, I stopped needing him to provide anything after I got the tenants. And then, for those saying that I should write off my father, you're probably right. In fact, I know you're right. But at the moment, I'm happily living elsewhere, and he's happily traveling the world with evil stepmother. Our current relationship is the occasional text message and maybe a visit when he happens to be in the country. Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed this one story today. Let me know in the comments if this story deserved the NuclearRevenge badge. I want to know what you think. If you aren't subscribed, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. See you guys in the next one.